Welcome back to Season 5 of Professional Perspectives. I'm Marvakela, joined by my co host Praneeth Vimuri. Today, we are sitting down with someone who lives and breathes communication, storytelling, and leadership at the highest level. A person whose writing has shaped conversations across LinkedIn, government, entrepreneurship, and economic development. Today, we are joined by Jack McKissen, a LinkedIn top voice and communications expert with more than 100,000 followers.
Mr. McKissen is the partner and director of association services at Governance Alive and the founder of M5 Strategy and Branding. He has spent more than a decade helping organizations, leaders, and entrepreneurs grow their influence, clarify their message, and tell their story in a way that drives real impact. Mr. McKissen has served as a speechwriter, communication counselor, coach, and editor for executives, policymakers, and entrepreneurs.
His work appears in Inc. magazine, Governing, LinkedIn, and major business platforms. He has written ebooks for clients on entrepreneurship, economics, association management, and sales strategy, including content used by organizations like the World Bank.
Whether he's guiding an association, consulting a startup, shaping economic policy conversations, or distilling complex ideas into stories that resonate with millions, Mr. McKisson brings clarity to chaos. His career is a masterclass in how to communicate with empathy, precision, and purpose.
We are excited to dive into his journey, his philosophy, and the mindset behind becoming a communicator people trust. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So to get started, the first question for you is on LinkedIn. You have a very big following of like above 100,000 people. How did you reach that milestone, and when did you realize communication could be a career and not just a skill?
Yeah, so when I went to college, I originally studied to be a novelist. I ended up changing my major, but I was always kind of a de facto writer in the organizations I worked with. And then 11 years ago, I read an article about getting your MBA online. I'd gotten one of my degrees online, and I felt like this article was misrepresenting, people who ended up doing that. So I wrote a response and posted it to LinkedIn using their blogging feature. It went viral. It got about 25,000 views, and I just really enjoyed people engaging with my writing. I kept going and kept writing for LinkedIn, and the actual human editors of LinkedIn saw my work and started sharing it and pushing it out. And that's how it happened. So lots of really good things to me happened to me because of that. But it started with that one blog on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you talked about your experience as a writer. What early experiences shaped your voice as a writer and storyteller writing these blogs?
Yeah, so I think what shapes a writer's voice is really sort of the stuff they consume. So I grew up, I learned how to read by reading comic books. I've always loved horror stories. I've always been a big novel reader, and just different, types of creative writing, song lyrics. I read a lot of song lyrics. And so I think I brought that to my writing on LinkedIn and in the business perspectives. I think that's something that makes my writing often sound different is the incorporation of techniques from fiction and other places that are outside of business writing. So that's really why I think some of it's spread.
So going back to like the LinkedIn aspect, right? You've built a huge following, and of course that's like a commitment, like for a follower to follow you, and it definitely shows an interest from them in your words and your writing pieces, right? So my question for you is, how do you build that trust and influence where you're able to get so many followers?
Yeah, so I really think being honest and authentic, and I think that that's kind of a sort of a cliche answer, but especially somewhere like LinkedIn, which is not often known for honesty or authenticity. It's a lot of people that sound alike, and so one of the things that I think differentiated me is I was willing to talk about different things on LinkedIn than other people were willing to talk about. Like for example. Um, I lived in St. Louis when sort of my following took off, and there were several significant race riots in St. Louis around that time. And at the time, I was actually consulting with a partner of mine who was black. And I would notice how when we would go into clients, I have like a bunch of tattoos on my arm. And depending on who I'm meeting with, that could be an advantage. When I have blue collar clients, I'll roll my sleeves up and I can project different ways. I can be, a business guy, or I can be one of the boys. And I really noticed that the individual I was working with, my friend and partner, he didn't have that freedom. If he rolled up his sleeves and he had tattoos, people would think things about him that they wouldn't necessarily think about me. So I ended up writing a post on LinkedIn called "The Difference Between Me and My Black Friend Like Me," and I think that got a few 100,000 views. It got a ton of comments. 80% of them were positive because I really just said that, right? I just observed this difference between us and didn't, take it into necessarily commentary on how that changes. It's just a reality I was trying to point out. Um, a lot of work like that on LinkedIn, where that is a professional article talking about, the freedoms we have when we're in front of people and privileges and things like that. It's not something people readily dive into. But it's like, I've spoken about this and written about it frequently. If you're going to be a thought leader, you actually have to have original thoughts that are worth following, not just, trying to say something. So that was probably the most important kind of mindset that built my following. Is if I cared about it, I was going to talk about it. And, even if I knew that would get a little bit of a backlash on some topics.
Yeah, I think that was super important in helping you grow as a person as well, grow authentically into this huge following. What do people misunderstand about the thought of leadership and writing all these blogs and communication?
Yeah, they think they can. This is tied into my last answer. They think they can do it without taking a risk. Basically, they think you can assume a position of leadership in your community, on your platform, whatever it is, without taking any sort of risk. And I just don't think that's true. I think leadership inherently involves risk, whether it's saying something that is bold and different or that, it can cause some backlash. But yeah, the idea that you can safely that it's just a matter of putting together the right sort of, I don't know, if a content plan or approach to it, and you can kind of safely get there. And I don't think you can, and I don't think that things like LinkedIn and stuff are that different than the rest of life, right? Like if we take it out of this digital space, the people that we think of as real leaders, whether they're famous or not famous, there's always some level of risk they've taken along the way that has put them there. And so that's the biggest thing people misunderstand is that you can do it, that you can gain followers without risking losing any followers. And that's just not true.
Yeah, and I definitely it was really thought provoking what you said about the article and how it is true, like it shows a side of the world that's maybe not so nice, and I feel like the way you wrote that article definitely is the reason why many people follow you and kind of resonate with you. And another question I have is because our audience is mainly high schoolers. For young people trying to build their voice online in a healthy and sustainable way, what advice would you give them?
First of all, lean into your strengths. So the fact that you are a high schooler, you are someone young, it comes with inherent weaknesses, right? Like regarding building a following or being in a position of leadership. That's you can't avoid that, right? You can't change that you're young or that people are going to view you as an experience. So bring what you can, bring the perspective that you can. I mean, obviously, with everything going on in society, it's like I have kids. I have a 26-year-old, a 20-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And I think that, I think more so than ever, the kind of separation between the generations involves a lot of language and culture that older people don't understand. And by older, I don't mean a lot older than that. I mean it's remarkably different, even 10 or 15 years older. So, one of the strengths you can bring is being sort of a translator of being someone who brings insight into the group of people you kind of inherently represent, and just really kind of a broader philosophy like that of lead from where you are, right? Like all of these things we've talked about so far, and we will talk about, are still applicable when you're younger, right? Like take a risk, like if there's especially that, right? And I'll probably come back to that a couple of times. So like if you see something that's wrong, if you see something that you think is needs changing, and say it, right? Like I don't think youth is uh prevents assuming a position of leadership. It's just like anything, right? If you're in a maze, for the mouse to find the cheese, it has to know where the walls are. And I think that that's the case for um, leadership too. You have to know what challenges you're going to have and just work your way around it. But I also think that and this would be the other thing about youth leadership, there's a moral clarity that comes with youth that's hard to maintain when you get older, right? It's hard for me to be sometimes, even with my approach of saying it and whatnot, I still have to think of, clients and customers and if I lose those, the impact that's going to have on my kids. It doesn't mean I compromise that, but the one of the biggest advantages of youth is moral clarity. You can just say exactly what's wrong, what needs fixing, what needs changing, without having to worry about those other things. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, how we're able to be just more direct, more forward. And something that I noticed is you have been a speechwriter and communications advisor. So, what would you say makes a great speech? Someone can have these great ideas, but if they're not able to articulate it, it doesn't really have an effect. So, what would you say can make a great speech, and what are some habits these high schoolers can do to communicate better?
Yeah, one of the things is I would look at a speech like a story. A speech has a beginning, a middle, and an end. One of the really big sort of I don't know, I think a lot of communicate business communication is not very good. A lot of business books, they don't look at it like a story. It's not a beginning, a middle, and end. It'll keep going. It'll not kind of bring it back to the beginning. So just tactically, if you're giving a speech, look at it as a story, and then always look at it as when you're at the ending, make sure you're tying it back to the beginning. Make sure this is a sort of self-contained thing. um, but the other thing that makes a good speech too is kind of the perspectives that you bring to it. Like, do you in most speeches are an act of bringing people in. So you want to figure out how you connect with people. Um you want to also, with a speech, I could get pretty technical about this, but one of the things I really love about speech writing is it has a rhythm. It's different than other types of writing. And I find that really fun. And actually, I mentioned earlier listening to songs or things like that. Engage with, if you're going to make a speech or you want to write a speech, engage with something that has a rhythm. And so that's what I do with speeches. I don't read them from the paper because that's not how people are engaging with them. I read them out loud after I write them, and I make sure that there's a rhythm and it kind of flows and there's a complete story there. But again, the bigger point too is if you're going to have the opportunity to be in front of people, make sure that it's appropriate for the context you're in, but have something worth saying. That's the biggest thing that makes a good speech. The technical stuff can work itself out.
Yeah, and I also definitely agree with the point about how you said if you want to be a thought leader, you have to have your own original thoughts. And it's also like, first, like, worry about the other stuff later, but like, first have something of substance.
Yeah.
So the reason I reached out to you on LinkedIn is because of your description, and I'm just gonna read it out for the audience. In your bio, it says, "I once heard Bruce Springsteen say that his whole career changed when he shifted his focus from talking about why there was a hole in his bucket and instead focused on the reasons why so many of us are born with the hole in our bucket. I would like to do the same thing. Could you talk to us about that and your inspiration behind it?"
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, when I was in high school, I did not do well at all. I grew up in a family that was very unique in a lot of really negative ways. And no one I knew had ever gone to get a 4-year degree. So I graduated 249th out of 252 students in my school. I graduated high school with a 1.5 GPA. When I graduated, and most of that wasn't because of lack of ability or anything like that. It was just I didn't know what came after, so I wasn't really motivated by this need to like earn something because I didn't know what came next. I figured I would just get a job, and then but very quickly after I graduated, I got the sense that I was capable of much more than what I was doing at the time. I just really didn't know how to get there. And I was in a Barnes and Noble hanging out with my brother. I was 19 at the time, and I sat down on a bench, and there was a book. It's actually this book here. I still have it. It's called "It Ain't No Sin to Be Glad You're Alive," and it was just randomly on the, or not. I don't think it was random, but it was just on the bench, and it's a book by a actual sociology professor who had kind of had a rough childhood and came to be this big fan of Bruce Springsteen. So he's talking about sort of his engagement with the music and what it did for him. And I was like, well, it sounds like it worked for this guy. I'll give it a try. And so that's exactly how I approached it. And I was deeply inspired by his music, which talks a lot about rising above your circumstances. I felt like, his story and my story and, the sociologist story and a lot of his fan stories are very similar. And So yeah, I really started engaging with the writing and inspired me to go to school. It's what inspired me to really be a writer. He's still a huge influence on my writing and writing style. I think that one of the things he does is translate these really big ideas into, a 3 or 4 minute pop song, which I think has a lot of analogies to a lot of business writing. Um, so and I did get the chance to meet him one time at a movie premiere and thank him for what he had done for me. So that was super cool. But that specific quote that you read talks about kind of a journey within his writing that he talks about, where his first albums were really focused on sort of him and his family and the upbringing that he had and all of that. And that was what my initial writing was focused on after that MBA article, was talking about my family being homeless and some of the things we had experienced. And then what he means by that quote is there was a shift in his writing where he stopped kind of focusing in on himself and wanted to know why people in general, the things that happen to them, and why so many of us are born facing an uphill battle, and really write about that. So that I always super admired that. I've loved that quote. And in his career path, when he made that switch, it really took off because people liked hearing him talk about himself, but even more, they liked feeling that they were, part of a community, that kind of all face these sort of things. So yeah, I'm deeply inspired by his work.
Yeah, that's truly inspiring to hear how that book really had such an impact on your life and how your whole mind shift even switched even after just reading that book. How would you say community affected this as a community shift from reactive approach to a more proactive in an economic development sort of way? How does your community change your mindset?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I really made a commitment in my career. Like, frankly, I've made a lot less money than I could have if that was my own motivation. But it immediately like when I internalized that, it had a really big impact on my career. So my first job, in sort of my professional path, I moved from Utah where I grew up. I decided to go to school, moved to Arizona, and I started working in an AmeriCorps program, which if your audience is not familiar with AmeriCorps, I would say check it out. What AmeriCorps is, it's a program through the federal government. They place you in a community-based organization. You make a stipend, but you get a grant. And so that was really how I paid for school and started my career. I started working for an organization um, that helped homeless veterans. And actually, Bruce Springsteen's most famous and biggest song is called "Born in the USA." It's actually about a homeless veteran, and so it did project me like right into that work. And I think that regarding community, I mean, uh, you know, it's easy, I think, for people who have similar experiences that I do, where you have to overcome something you were born into, to make the assumption that if you do that, you pulled yourself up by the bootstraps and did that alone, and that's never really the truth. Even for how alone we all are, there's still a community of people around us that help us rise up. Sometimes you don't even recognize people as part of your community, but someone does something for you, and I look at that. Examples for me was when I kind of got on my path and went to school and started working for that organization and started writing. um, I had professors and teachers that kind of knew some of the financial barriers I had and really like directly helped me out and became part of that community, and I wouldn't at all be the person I am today without them. So it plays a huge role, and especially it can play a bigger role if you actively cultivate it. And I think if you're young, that's what you want to think of is, who are the types of people I want to have around me? Who do I want to learn from? And it's a this is the last thing I'll say about it. It's also like not just who you want to learn from, but whose community do you want to be a part of? Who do you want to support? Who do you want to be there? Because even kind of to the point about Bruce Springsteen, I feel privileged that I was part of his audience. He did a lot for me. And so, I try to do what I can for some remote, super rich stranger or whatever, if that's like support their work or something. But yeah, community is a two-way street. So surround yourself and then surround other people.
Yeah, I definitely really feel like I can agree about what you said about cultivate your community. That's a very interesting aspect, in the sense that community is very important, and it's very important to kind of maintain that and make it be a source where that can bring you up and not pull you down.
Yeah.
Um, so now switching a bit, you've written a lot on entrepreneurship's role in local economies. What would you say is the strongest driver of economic transformation in communities?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Entrepreneurship plays a big role, and I'll give an example of a project I worked on. So, Several years ago, I had a friend move from St. Louis, where I was living, to a community called Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie is a small town, kind of up by the Great, or not a small town, it's a small city up by the Great Lakes. At one point, it had been the steel manufacturing capital of really the world. The steel industry collapsed in the 70s. And ever since then, that community has really struggled. I mean, you can buy, probably not anymore, but when I started working with them, you could buy essentially what in a lot of communities would be a mansion for like $40,000. They just had no economic base. There was a change in law around 2017 that created something called the Opportunity Zone. What opportunity zones were is they identified the poorest zip codes in America and said that these are opportunity zones, and basically if you start businesses within them, you get some favorable tax treatment. Because of that, Erie started investing in creating this entrepreneurship community and asked me to come work as a consultant to help them kind of design that and really communicate that too to the world of what was happening in Erie. And we worked I worked with them for several years. They ended up winning an award for being the top urban opportunity zone from Forbes. But that was no company in a lot of economic development. The thing is, bring companies in, right? You want to bring someone with 1,000 jobs into your community. They're not going to come somewhere like Erie, or they weren't going to come somewhere like Erie. So that really had to be homegrown. So if you're talking about transformation, it's like anything, right? Communities aren't that different than people. They're just collections of people. So if you say, I want to go for this transformation, or I want to be someone different, you can wait for someone to come do that for you, or you can start doing it yourself, and doing it yourself is going to be hard, but you control that, right? You make that decision that I'm going to start becoming this thing. And at a community level, that's what investing in entrepreneurship does. You stop waiting around and start building the opportunity for yourself.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. And kind of bouncing off your answer, what do you see as the future of entrepreneurship in these smaller cities and more rural areas?
Yeah, I think that I think a bunch of things. Actually, I think these are really good questions, guys. I think that uh, when I first started doing that writing, it was like it was a few years before COVID, and it was there were obviously remote working and things like that then, but it wasn't as prevalent or as baked in as it is now. And so the idea was that if you were going to be involved in building a successful business, you had to be in the city, you had to be surrounded by these people. But I see a lot of you know I don't think necessarily there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want that life. They want to live in a small town, or they want to live in somewhere even smaller than a small town. And so I think that, these tools, I think that there's a saying that basically amounts to talent is everywhere. And so I think one of those things is it will give people in communities that have never had access to that opportunity. I'll give an example. It's not on my LinkedIn profile, but about 15 years ago, I started a nonprofit, um, and it was called Look Up. And what it did was donate comic books to low income schools. And we ended up donating a bunch of comic books to schools on Native American reservations through a connection I had there. And when you would visit those places, even in 2012, which isn't super long ago, I remember going to a school to hand out these comic books and staying in a hotel the night before, and they had their local newspaper that was talking about a nearby community had just gotten electricity for the first time. And so, I mean, obviously, if you live in places like that, or if you live in, really anywhere that doesn't have a lot of opportunity, you were just either forced to be out of luck or leave. And I think that that's not the case anymore. And I think that's a really good thing, not just for people who want to start a business, but for society in general. You should be able to, if you can, start something from wherever you want to. If you want to stay by your family, that should be an option.
Yeah, definitely. And also, it's really cool to hear about your nonprofit. It sounds like a really awesome mission to donate comic books to areas where they don't really have the opportunity to get some, even if they want to. But yeah, again, bouncing off what you said on just like local government and small businesses in general, what do local governments often overlook when trying to support these small businesses and startups?
Yeah, they they overlook the potential of the long term investment. So local governments are often trying to because it's political in nature. Everybody wants a press release. and they want to say we brought in this chip maker that has 1,000, that has 1,000 jobs or that type of thing. Often though, those things don't always pan out the way they're kind of packaged. But they're really overlooking that potential for that 1,000 person plant to grow from within. And even to the point of what they really overlook is the pipeline of talent, like further into schools, like you guys are, right? Like obviously, you know uh you guys, and I'm sure a lot of other students, and things like that, you're not the norm, right? You're out here doing a podcast at whatever time it is tonight, and you have ambition and hustle and things like that. you know Really, there should be a system that reaches all the way down into schools, pre-college, to identify that. And um it's like almost if they treated it like a sports team, right? Like, I don't know what communities you guys live in, but you may end up going to college somewhere else and going off, and they've lost that talent, versus sort of the idea of, in the NBA, we were talking a little bit about it before the call, you get those super max deals only if you stay with your original team. And I think communities could kind of learn something like that. Like, we should cultivate this, start growing it early. And you're going to get potentially grants or funding or support that's going to be a lot harder to find somewhere else. So that's one thing I wish they would look at it. And that would take a level of creativity that sometimes isn't there in local government. And it's why people who are entrepreneurial or have that drive also get involved in your local government. Because again, yes, it's a system and a structure that can stifle creativity, but it's also people. And if you change the people in it, you're going to change the system.
Yeah, those are some great insights on entrepreneurship, economic development in these small cities. And I really like that idea of developing your own small city. And so you stay there and the economic develop just exponentially grows like that. So thank you so much for those insights. And kind of shifting our conversation just a little bit, you have coached many leaders. And I was just wondering, what are some of these habits that these leaders do that's consistent, whether that's, again, habits, goals they set for themselves, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, some of the common things is, I would say, one of the most basic things that sets them apart is doing what they say they're going to do, right? And like, because you get a lot of people who are in authority but don't follow through, and I understand they're busy and things like that, but the people who really, because a leader is not something you appoint yourself. You can call yourself that, but that has no bearing on whether or not anyone actually views you as a leader. Leader isn't something self-appointed; it's appointed by other people. And if you don't follow through, you're not going to be elevated to a position of leadership. So I've seen, I've worked as a coach with a guy who's he's a CEO of a very large company, and it's a commercial construction company, and nationwide, and he knows this, so I wouldn't be saying anything he didn't know about himself. He is not necessarily a pizzazz person. He doesn't speech giving isn't his thing, because I help him with speeches. But everyone views him as a leader, and it's not because he's this big rah guy. It's because when Brian says something, if he says he's going to do it, it happens. If it doesn't happen, he tells you why it doesn't happen. So I think the first thing is always following through. The second thing is, you typically, I believe, in people who are true leaders, you don't hear something negative. You hear reality, which can be interpreted as negative, right? If I say very directly, this business is declining or whatever, and that's just the facts of the matter. That's not being negative. What I mean is, like, they are always, at least at some level, working on a solution to the problem, even if the problem is obvious. So and think about people, even, and I think this is part of the advantage of youth, right? Like, think of the people you guys surround yourselves with. It's like, there are those people who are just like, it's never going to work, it sucks, it's all going to crap or whatever, and that person's never going to be seen as a leader. People don't want to follow that. And even if they do, because there are such scenarios where people do get elevated to positions of leadership, but that's not sustainable leadership. People don't want to follow someone down a dark path. So yeah, follow through, avoiding negativity, and really, otherwise, it does come in all shapes and sizes. Like, some people inspire people because they are a real rah person. Other people have a level of quiet inspiration. And then the third, probably, other thing there, and it's kind of related to it. If you don't believe in people, people are not going to believe in you. and you really have to, and it can be a habit because, right, like sometimes people don't necessarily deserve to have the best believed in them, and have not exhibit that, and obviously there's a limit to that when you have to just kind of get your distance from someone, but in general, yeah, getting other people, you have to believe in others before they're going to believe in you, and that's probably the third thing.
Yeah, I feel like those are all just amazing pieces of advice that apply to like literally everything in life. So yeah, thank you for that. And on the other side of the aspect, on like a professional sense, what have you learned from helping edit or write books for these clients across like economics, leadership, and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so editing is actually one of my favorite sort of things I've done in my career because um, what I really like. There's a quote from Michelangelo, and I might the sculptor, and I might butcher the quote or not quite exactly get it right, but he's asked about the sculpture David, and he said, "I just chipped away everything that wasn't David." And that's the approach I take to editing, is you try and strip away, because working with entrepreneurs or the reference to the World Bank, I helped edit a text that the World Bank used on behavioral economics that had a whole bunch of authors on it. And so a whole bunch of obviously people that work on that type of book are writers in their own right, PhDs, I mean, really hardcore types of writing. And so I take that approach to it of, I help, because what often happens with leaders is you sit across from someone and they sound amazing, and then when it's their turn to kind of express that through writing, it's just a separate skill. And so often a good editor will help someone sound more like themselves than they sound on their own, and that should really be the goal. And then regarding what you learn from it, you learn lots of things. You learn how people think. You learn how to stitch together someone else's arguments into a logical thing, which actually is an important skill. Like, you can, if everything is your own opinion, people are going to tire of it quickly. You got to bring in, affirmation of the things you're thinking and things like that. So it definitely helps you learn how to arrange ideas in a way that can be compelling.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about this, but I was wondering if you could branch out a little bit more. How do you approach writing for someone else while maintaining your own authenticity in the writing?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting exercise because there's a lot of art to it. And so one of the first things I do is I just get to know the person. I listen to them talk, essentially. And because that's what you want to arrive at. You want the writing to sound like they do in real life. And so I pick a I you know I listen. And what's interesting for people, if you're working with someone and you're writing for them, often they come in with a very fixed idea of what it is they want you to help them say. And so you'll start talking with them and kind of getting their story and getting their background. And you realize often that the most interesting part of what they have to say is something that they kind of, it's a cast off. It's not their main focus. And then I'll be like, well, that's the thing that's really interesting. That's the thing we should dive into. But you really try and get in someone's head. I mean, it's one of the aspects of it that I love, because it reminds me of, I think it's kind of related to acting in a way. Like, when you're trying to get into the mindset of a character and trying to speak authentically as that person, right? And like, we have all seen movies where it's like there are actors who disappear into the role, and then there are actors who are always that actor, with just a different name. Essentially, they're always playing the same character. And obviously, the actors who disappear into the role are typically thought of as like the great actors. And I think that same thing with writing. You got to find a way into your person's head, and and the best way to do that is people will typically, if you listen to them for long enough, they'll give a good indication of what they care about, and that's kind of where you start.
Yeah, and so going back to your writing process, right? You like definitely wrote thousands of pieces, and many of them, like lately, at least on your LinkedIn, they're explaining complex topics like economics or public policy. How do you explain them in a simple and easy way?
Yeah, so thank you, thank you, I appreciate that question, because yeah, my writing itself is as definitely, like, I've that's kind of how I use my audience now, is I'm less focused on like the numbers I'm generating, and more that I'm writing about things I care about to people who are interested in it. And so yeah, complex ideas, I mean, that's one of the things that that I think is an art, and I think it's separated my writing, both the writing under my name and the writing I've done for clients. And it's something I've been hired to do frequently, is to take a complex idea and get it to where people can understand it. And I actually do look to Bruce Springsteen and other songs and things like that, because I think of a song, like a pop song is a 3 to 4 minute long song. There's a lot of inherent structure to it you have to follow. And within that, you're trying to explain what are actually some really complex ideas, things about like love and connection and stuff like that. And, some of the biggest things we think about as humans, but it's digestible in the song. And so that's where I take that learning in is, um, you can talk about big ideas in language that's accessible. There's nothing you need to there's and um often the most powerful ideas that we think are the most complex are actually the simplest. And so yeah, like really really use the language. That's why working on the Bank book, there are, a book like that can be completely incomprehensible to most people because it's buried in language that's not accessible. And so that's why I get the inspiration I do, is because I think that they bring accessible language to big ideas. And the other thing I would say too, real quickly, is um, from a very technical point of view in the writing, metaphors, things that illustrate ideas are better than talking about the idea itself. Most things are understandable if you. It's like math, right? Like there's the 4 times 8, and there's 8 oranges and 4 people, and so yeah, it's that's how I do it.
Yeah, that's great to see how you actually have a process almost on how you explain these topics effectively. But what separates your communication that informs versus the communication that influences people?
Yeah, I think it's I think they're actually combined. So this is something I say a lot about writing, and specifically to LinkedIn, but really anywhere. Um, you know, no one is looking to get sold anything when they go online. Whether that's, I mean, you can go on there to buy something. That's a little bit different than looking to be sold, right? And so there's this perception that whether it's a product or an idea, that there's this group of people just waiting for me to tell them, whatever my product or idea is. That's not why people engage with content. They want to be educated, they want to be entertained, um, they want to learn something, and you can really combine all of these things into one thing. And on LinkedIn especially, there's an assumption that people are on there for really specific business reasons. A lot of people are on there to kill time, and because it's a professionally acceptable way to waste time, kind of. And so I know that when people scroll through and see my articles, I don't count on anyone knowing my name or anything like that. I have just a couple of seconds to capture their attention on there. And so yeah, I don't think really anything separates them. I think informing people is a way of influencing them. You're influencing them to open up their mind and take in something. And I think that you do that. Yeah, I think the influence comes with it. And I think the other thing is, there's a lot of things that aren't used in professional writing, like humor or other ways that can help some of those complex ideas get digested.
Yeah, and to talk about in general, like your career trajectory, you talked about in high school how you maybe didn't do as well as you expected, and I feel like there are maybe a lot of students who are hearing this right now who kind of want to turn it around and uh, aspire for higher, right? What would you recommend to them, and what would your advice be for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, including young people, end up in that position for some of the same reasons I did, where like I said, no one in my family had gone to college, no one in my family had ever started a business. There's a lot of things no one in my family had ever done. And so I got this perception that there were certain types of people that went to college and certain types of people that didn't. And I just wasn't one of those people. And that mindset can carry over. You hear a lot of adults speak about that. They'll talk about things like entrepreneurship. There are certain types of people that start a business and certain types of people that don't. And I'm just not one of them. None of that's true. There's not a certain type of person that does anything. And there's just whether you do it or not. And um, I know from my personal experience that's easier said than done. But that would be something I would say to somebody that really wants to turn it around and they're young, is there's nothing that separates you from people that achieve huge things. Nothing inherent. And then the other thing, I know, when you're young, you can feel like you've made this choice that has closed off opportunities. Like it's already too late. I'm not going to get into the school I want or anything like that. Um, Mark Twain, the writer, big influence on me, big influence on all writers, big influence on Bruce Springsteen, on every American writer. Mark Twain has been an influence on. When you look at Mark Twain's career, he didn't publish his first, story until he's well into his 40s. He was a reporter. He was a gold miner. He did all of these other things until he found his path. And so, yeah, if you're looking to turn it around, there's always time to turn it around. And even the experiences where you get into that place shape who you are. Use them, right? And you can speak to certain things with authenticity that other people just don't experience. So, yeah, if you're in that place, it's never too late. Um, even if, like I said, I started at community college. My first college semester, I took one English 101 class in my local community college, and then just built on it from there. So yeah, never too late, and anyone can be the type of person that succeeds.
Yeah, that's great advice for our young audience. And one more thing that I think is important for them to know is when they are navigating career uncertainty or like imposter syndrome kind of things, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, just stick to it. Like just you're there. You Like I said, you can't avoid how old you are. I mean, I've gone. You know, I when I went to school, I completed school very quickly, and rose up professionally pretty fast. And so I was at one point in my career, I was an executive at a government agency where we had a management team of 40. We had a management team of 30. I was the only one younger than 42, and I was 24. And there's nothing I can do about that, right? And so, like, regarding imposter syndrome, it's kind of tried to say don't worry about it, but don't worry about it, right? Like just get out there and again, kind of using the NBA analogy, right? Like if you get the ball at the end and you take a second to question whether or not you're the person that should be taking that shot, you're never going to make it. And so it's kind of just something to power through in a way that uh, and maybe one of the ways to power through that is knowing that almost everybody experiences that at some point, right? Like and um, you just gotta say no. I'm here for a reason, and I think that really understanding, kind of back to one of your earlier questions, what you bring to the table. Like, if fully own what you don't bring to the table, but fully own also what you do bring to the table. And there's a reason if you're in a position to give insight, and you feel like an imposter. There's a reason you're there to begin with. So just do it. And it's funny because in my LinkedIn journey, that was something I recognized early on that differentiated me from other people, was that I didn't hesitate to kind of tell people what I thought should be done about something. And your ideas will stand on their own too, and your ideas and your effort. So if you bring effort, if you have good ideas, yeah, people might think you don't belong there, but you'll eventually prove that you do.
Yeah, of course. And as we start to close off the episode, for the final question, it is, of course, our audience is young, but for our whole audience, if there was one piece of advice that you could leave them with, what would that be?
It kind of ties into a lot of things we're talking about. Just believe in yourself. If really it all starts with that. If you want to have influence, if you want to have impact, no one else is going to believe in you if you don't. And so believe in yourself and know that, the things that happen in life. I mean, I've had so many failures. I've had things that didn't turn out the way I'd hoped, ideas that totally imploded, things I was excited about that didn't pan out. Um, but again, to the sort of NBA analogy, what do they say? Shoot or shoot, right? If you miss a shot, just keep shooting, and just believe that everyone's going to go in, and eventually they will. And so, but no one else is going to believe they're going to go in if you don't. So yeah, believe in yourself.
Perfect. I think that perfectly wraps up everything you've said, all the points you've made. That's just a great piece of advice that works for all age groups, not just our audience. So thank you so much for everything you've given us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome. You guys are doing great work here.
course, yeah. Thank you again for all your advice, wisdom, and overall, yeah, an hour of your evening. But yeah, it was really impactful and influential, and I'm sure it's going to inspire a lot of our audience.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.